I really wanted a job, and I was so friendly and everybody.
She had 3 massive strokes at age 39 while pregnant. Doctors said she'd never walk or talk again, but that was just the beginning of Patricia Neal's nightmare. Her husband, Roald Dahl, forced her through brutal therapy while secretly cheating with her friend. Her 7-year-old daughter died in her arms. Her infant son's stroller was hit by a taxi. Now, the real story of Hollywood's strongest survivor makes her movie tragedies look like fairy tales. Patricia Neal was born as Patsy Louise Neal on January 20th, 1926, in Packard, Kentucky. Her father, William Burdett Coot Neal, worked as a coal company manager. Her mother, Patricia Neal, was the daughter of the town doctor. Packard was a tiny coal mining camp with a population of just over 400 people at its peak. By the 1940s, it had become a ghost town when the coal ran out. Life there was tough, but it shaped Patricia's strong will and determination. When she was still a child, her family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee. She attended Knoxville High School, where she quickly stood out. She was drawn to performance from an early age and found every opportunity to showcase her talent. By the time she was a teenager, she had already won the Tennessee State Award for dramatic reading. She performed monologues at community gatherings and social clubs, impressing everyone who watched her. Even though she came from a small Appalachian town that would eventually disappear from maps, she had no plans to stay in the shadows. At age 10, a single performance changed her life. One evening at a Christmas program at a Methodist church, she watched her grammar school teacher, Cornelia Avanti, deliver a dramatic monologue. Patricia had been raised Baptist, but she often attended Methodist services with friends. That night, as she listened to Avanti's voice fill the church, something clicked. She later described the moment in simple words. "I remember being 11 and going to church to give a monologue, and I said to myself, 'This is what I want to do.'" From then on, acting became her obsession. She started staging small performances on the front porch of her family's home. She performed dramatic readings in her Aunt Maud's sitting room, turning family gatherings into theater nights. Word spread quickly, and by high school, she was being asked to perform at social clubs all over Knoxville. It was clear to everyone, especially Patricia, that she wasn't just playing around. This was what she was meant to do. That same year, she wrote a letter to Santa Claus. While other children asked for dolls or new shoes, she had one request: drama lessons. Her parents took her wish seriously and enrolled her in classes with Emily Mahan, a well-known drama teacher in Knoxville. Mahan had recently returned from New York City and had high standards for her students. She was strict, but also deeply supportive. Under her guidance, Patricia learned how to control her voice, understand characters, and master the stage. She performed in annual recitals and local productions, gaining confidence with each performance. By the time she graduated from Knoxville High School in 1943, she was already one of the most promising young performers in Tennessee. But staying in Knoxville was never an option. She wanted more. And that summer, she got the chance to prove herself. In 1943, Patricia Neal enrolled in the drama school at Northwestern University. That summer, she joined a small theater troupe in Eagles Mere, Pennsylvania. The experience changed everything for her. By the end of the season, she decided to leave school and chase her dream. She packed her bags, took the $300 she had saved, and moved to New York. She found an apartment on the West Side with 3 friends and started auditioning. Money was tight, so she took jobs as a cashier, a clerk, and a model just to get by. But acting was always the goal. After months of trying, she finally landed a spot as an understudy for both female leads in The Voice of the Turtle, a romantic comedy that had been a Broadway hit since 1943. Being an understudy wasn't glamorous, but it was her first step into the world of professional theater. She spent her nights watching the lead actresses, studying their performances, and preparing for a chance that might never come. During this time, the play's producer suggested she change her name from Patsy to Patricia, believing it would make her sound more sophisticated. She agreed, not knowing that soon, the name Patricia Neal would be one people would never forget. By 1946, her patience and hard work finally paid off. Playwright Lillian Hellman noticed her talent and cast her as Regina Hubbard in Another Part of the Forest, a prequel to The Little Foxes. It was a challenging role. Regina was a ruthless and ambitious young woman from a corrupt Southern family, a character that had already been played by legends like Tallulah Bankhead and Bette Davis. Taking on the part was a huge risk, but Neal wasn't afraid. The play opened on November 20th, 1946, at the Fulton Theater. Neal's performance stunned audiences. Critics called her acting electrifying and a revelation. She balanced Regina's manipulative nature with moments of vulnerability, making the character entirely her own. The production ran for 182 performances, and Neal won 5 major theater awards, including the very first Tony Award for Best Supporting Actress. She was only 21 years old. But success didn't come easy. Neal pushed herself to the limit during rehearsals, often staying up late to perfect her lines. Lillian Hellman was a tough director who demanded emotional depth in every scene. Neal embraced the challenge, working harder than ever before. The stress took a toll. She struggled with exhaustion and self-doubt, but when she stepped on stage, none of it showed. She delivered every performance with intensity, holding nothing back. Comparisons to Tallulah Bankhead and Bette Davis came quickly. Critics saw in Neal the same commanding presence, the same ability to play strong, complicated women. But she wasn't just following in their footsteps. She had her own style, her own way of making a character come alive. Patricia Neal's Hollywood journey started with a 7-year contract at Warner Brothers in 1948. It was a major breakthrough for a young actress, fresh from her Tony Award win for Another Part of the Forest. Her film debut came the following year in John Loves Mary, a romantic comedy released on February 19, 1949. The movie starred Ronald Reagan as a returning soldier caught in a web of romantic misunderstandings. Neal played Mary McKinley, the woman at the center of it all. The film, based on a successful Broadway play, was lighthearted and fun, far from the dramatic roles she would later be known for, but it gave her a strong start. Critics praised her natural screen presence. Variety called the film a punchy laugh-getter and noted that Neal held her own alongside more experienced actors like Reagan and Jack Carson. The movie earned a modest box office return, but it put Neal on the map. Warner Brothers quickly pushed her into more films, including The Hasty Heart and The Fountainhead, both released in 1949. But despite her early success, she often felt trapped in roles that didn't suit her strengths. The studio system was strict, and young actors had little say in their careers. That same year, she landed a major role in The Fountainhead, playing Dominique Franchon opposite Gary Cooper. The film, based on Ayn Rand's novel, tackled themes of ambition and individualism. It received mixed reviews, but Neal's performance stood out. Off-screen, she and Cooper began a passionate affair. She was 23, he was 48. She later described him as the most ravishingly beautiful man I had ever seen. Their chemistry was electric, but their relationship was complicated. Cooper was married to socialite Veronica "Rocky" Balfe and had a teenage daughter. At first, they kept their romance quiet, meeting at friends' homes instead of public places. But Hollywood was full of whispers, and soon their affair became an open secret. In 1950, everything changed. Neal discovered she was pregnant with Cooper's child. At first, she was overwhelmed with excitement, but the reality of their situation quickly set in. Earlier that year, Ingrid Bergman had been condemned by the public after having a child with director Roberto Rossellini. Neal knew she could face the same fate. Cooper understood the risks, too. A scandal could end both their careers. Cooper made the decision for both of them. He arranged for Neal to have an abortion, something she later called the most painful moment of her life. She said, "I walked into that office feeling like I wanted to die." The experience left deep emotional scars. Though they stayed together for a while, things were never the same. Cooper was torn between guilt and love. Their relationship, once passionate and intense, started to unravel. By late 1951, it all came crashing down. Rocky confronted her husband, forcing him to admit the affair. Their daughter Maria, angry and humiliated, took her own revenge by spitting at Neal in public. The pressure became too much. Cooper ended things. Neal, heartbroken, made one final attempt to speak to him, calling his mother in hopes of reconnecting. She was shut down immediately. She then called Cooper directly. He refused to talk. That was it. Their love affair was over. Despite the heartbreak, Neal moved forward. In 1951, she starred in The Day the Earth Stood Still, a groundbreaking science fiction film directed by Robert Wise. She played Helen Benson, a widowed mother who becomes an unlikely ally to an alien visitor. The movie became a classic, and her line, "Klaatu Barada Nikto," became one of the most famous in cinema history. 6 years later, she starred in A Face in the Crowd, 1957, a film that was ahead of its time. Directed by Elia Kazan, it followed the rise and fall of a manipulative media personality played by Andy Griffith. Neal played Marcia Jeffries, the radio producer who first discovered him. The film wasn't an immediate hit, but over time, it became recognized as one of the most important critiques of media and power. Patricia Neal's career was filled with unforgettable moments, but her life behind the scenes was just as dramatic. In 1963, she delivered one of the greatest performances in film history. Starring in HUD alongside Paul Newman, she played Alma Brown, a tough yet compassionate housekeeper who refused to fall under HUD's spell. She was on screen for only 21 minutes, but every second counted. Her husky voice, quiet strength, and effortless realism made Alma feel like a real person, not just a character in a movie. Newman had the flashier role, but Neal held her own. She brought warmth and humor to Alma without letting her be overshadowed. Critics praised her ability to say so much with just a glance or a slight change in expression. In one scene, HUD drunkenly propositions her, but she doesn't give in. Instead, she shows layers of exhaustion, pain, and quiet defiance, all without raising her voice. The film premiered on May 29, 1963. While much of the attention was on Newman, Neal's performance became the heart of the story. On April 13, 1964, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress at the 36th Academy Awards. It was a historic win, one of the shortest performances ever to take home the Oscar. More importantly, it proved that actresses didn't need long screen time or glamorous roles to make an impact. Alma Brown was a working woman, grounded in reality, and Neal made her unforgettable. Despite her success, Hollywood didn't always know what to do with her. Neal had a deep voice and a strong presence that set her apart from other leading ladies of the time. While actresses like Audrey Hepburn and Grace Kelly were cast as delicate and romantic, Neal was often given roles as tough-minded women. Studio executives told her she was too strong or too serious for certain parts. Instead of playing elegant socialites or love-struck heroines, she was cast as survivors, women who endured hardship but never lost their spirit. This had its advantages. She played powerful characters that stood out in films like A Face in the Crowd, 1957, and The Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951. But it also meant she had to fight harder for recognition in an industry that preferred women to be soft-spoken and demure. Even when she played vulnerable characters, her strength often defined how people saw her. Off-screen, her life was no less intense. On July 2, 1953, she married British writer Roald Dahl. He was already making a name for himself with dark and imaginative stories, but together, they became one of the most fascinating couples of their time. Over the years, they had 5 children: Olivia, Tessa, Theo, Ophelia, and Lucy. Their marriage was passionate but difficult. Dahl was known for his sharp wit, but he could also be controlling. Friends described their relationship as a mix of deep love and constant clashes. They faced unimaginable tragedies together, starting with an accident that nearly took their son's life. On December 5, 1960, 4-month-old Theo was in his baby carriage when a taxi struck him on Madison Avenue in New York City. The accident caused severe brain damage, leading to years of treatment. Dahl, determined to help, worked with doctors to develop the Wade-Dahl-Till valve, a device that improved treatment for children with hydrocephalus. Just when they thought the worst was behind them, another tragedy struck. On November 17, 1962, their 7-year-old daughter Olivia contracted measles encephalitis. At first, it seemed like a normal case of measles. Then, without warning, her condition worsened. She fell unconscious and never woke up. Losing Olivia devastated them both, but Dahl responded by becoming an advocate for measles vaccinations. Neal, on the other hand, threw herself into her work, using acting as a way to cope with the overwhelming grief. Then, in 1965, her own life nearly ended. While pregnant with her 5th child, she suffered 3 massive cerebral aneurysms. Doctors weren't sure if she would survive. Even if she did, they doubted she would ever walk or talk again. Dahl refused to accept that. He pushed her through a brutal rehabilitation program, forcing her to relearn basic skills. His methods were often harsh, but they worked. Neal made a recovery that stunned doctors. Patricia Neal's return to Hollywood was nothing short of a miracle. On April 10, 1967, she walked onto the stage at the Academy Awards to present the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. Just 2 years earlier, 3 massive strokes had left her paralyzed on her right side and unable to speak. Many thought she would never recover, but there she was, standing tall and delivering her lines without hesitation. The audience rose to its feet. The standing ovation lasted nearly a full minute, long enough to cost the network $40,000 in extended airtime. It wasn't just applause, it was recognition of the impossible. Neal had fought her way back, defying every expectation. That moment wasn't just her return to Hollywood, it was proof that she had won her greatest battle. The ovation changed everything for her. She later admitted that it gave her the confidence to believe she could act again. She still had doubts about her memory and physical limitations, but now she knew she had to try. That night set the stage for her comeback film. The subject was Roses in 1968. The film was a test of everything she had fought to regain. Directed by Ulu Grossbard and based on Frank D. Gilroy's Pulitzer Prize-winning play, it told the story of a troubled family in post-World War II America. Neal played Nettie Cleary, a wife struggling with disappointment in her marriage while trying to reconnect with her son, played by Martin Sheen. At first, Neal was hesitant to take the role. She feared she wouldn't be able to keep up with her co-stars, Jack Albertson and Martin Sheen, who had performed their roles on Broadway. Memory loss made rehearsals difficult. Some days she forgot lines. Some days she doubted herself completely. But she pushed through, determined to prove she could still act. Her performance was deeply moving. Roger Ebert praised her ability to suggest more than she reveals, calling her presence on screen a quiet force. One of the most powerful moments in the film was a simple dance between mother and son. Just 3 years earlier, she had been unable to walk. Now she was performing a physically demanding scene with grace. That moment was more than acting. It was proof of how far she had come. For her role in The Subject Was Roses, Neal earned her second Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. Her first had come 5 years earlier for HUD in 1963. This time, the nomination carried a different meaning. It wasn't just about talent, it was about resilience. Her story reached beyond Hollywood. Stroke survivors saw her as living proof that recovery was possible. Some visited the set while she was filming. Others sent letters. She later said, "People who came to watch us weren't just fans. They were stroke victims relearning how to walk and talk themselves." With her second chance at life, Neal wanted to help others. She became an advocate for stroke rehabilitation, sharing her experience and raising awareness. Much of her recovery had been guided by Roald Dahl, her husband at the time, and their neighbor, Valerie Griffiths. They had pushed her through a demanding routine of physical and cognitive exercises. She never forgot how important that support had been. Now, she wanted to give others the same hope. In 1978, her hometown of Knoxville honored her by opening the Patricia Neal Rehabilitation Center. It became one of the leading stroke and brain injury recovery centers in the country, helping thousands of patients regain mobility and independence. Neal stayed involved for the rest of her life, visiting patients and reminding them that no matter how difficult recovery seemed, they could get better. Meanwhile, her marriage, already filled with tension, became even more difficult. Dahl was brilliant and sharp-witted, but at home, his sarcasm often turned cruel. Neal privately called him Roald the Rotten and admitted that his controlling nature made their relationship exhausting. She sometimes felt more like his patient than his wife. Then came the final betrayal. In 1983, after 30 years of marriage, Neal discovered that Dahl had been having an affair. The other woman was Felicity Crosland, a set designer who had been a close family friend for years. The affair had been going on since the early 1970s. Even their children knew about it before Neal did. The discovery was devastating. Neal had stood by Dahl through everything. The loss of their 7-year-old daughter Olivia to measles encephalitis in 1962. The accident that left their son Theo with severe brain damage in 1960, and her own grueling recovery. After everything they had endured, she never imagined he would betray her like this. When Neal confronted him, his reaction shocked her. According to her autobiography, As I Am, he laughed when she told him how deeply hurt she was. That moment broke something in her. She filed for divorce, and later that year, Dahl married Crosland. Even after their marriage ended, Neal never denied that Dahl had saved her life. Without his determination, she might never have walked or spoken again. He had pushed her past her limits, and for that, she was grateful. But she also knew that his relentless control had drained her. Their relationship was a mix of love, survival, and struggle. They endured tragedies that bonded them, but in the end, Dahl's infidelity shattered everything. Looking back, Neal saw the good and the bad. "I owe him my life," she once said, "but I also lost myself along the way." Patricia Neal spent her later years focused on something bigger than acting. After surviving a series of devastating strokes, she became an advocate for stroke rehabilitation and health awareness. She worked with organizations like the American Stroke Association, sharing her story to inspire people going through similar struggles. In 1978, her hometown of Knoxville honored her legacy by opening the Patricia Neal Rehabilitation Center at Fort Sanders Regional Medical Center. The facility helped patients recover from strokes, brain injuries, and other disabilities. This wasn't just an award with her name on it. It was something real, something that gave people a second chance, the way she had fought for hers. Even though advocacy became her main focus, Neal never completely stepped away from acting. She continued taking roles into the 1990s, appearing in films like Cookie's Fortune in 1999 and TV shows like Murder, She Wrote. Acting had always been a part of her, And even after everything she had been through, she wasn't ready to let it go. After more than 60 years in the industry, she finally retired in 2009. Her later years were spent with family, reflecting on a life that had been filled with incredible success and heartbreaking loss. In 1988, she told her story in her autobiography, As I Am. The book didn't hold anything back. She wrote about her passionate affair with Gary Cooper, the heartbreak of losing 2 of her children, and the moment everything changed when she suffered 3 massive strokes at just 39. She also spoke openly about her marriage to Roald Dahl, revealing how he pushed her through recovery in ways that sometimes felt more controlling than supportive. Their marriage lasted 30 years before ending in divorce when she discovered his affair. One of the most painful moments in the book was her confession about choosing to abort Cooper's child, a decision that haunted her for decades. Critics praised As I Am for its honesty. One reviewer called it a raw yet inspiring portrait of a woman who refused to be defined by tragedy. Readers connected with her story not just because she was famous, but because she had lived through things that tested every part of her strength. Her story was about resilience, not just Hollywood. Over her long career, Neal earned some of the highest honors in film and television. In 1964, she won an Academy Award for Best Actress for HUD, delivering a performance as Alma Brown that remains one of the most celebrated in film history. That same role earned her a British Academy Film Award, and she won another BAFTA in 1965 for In Harm's Way. Television brought more recognition when she won a Golden Globe in 1972 for her role in The Homecoming, A Christmas Story. But her success started long before that. In 1947, she won one of the first ever Tony Awards for Best Featured Actress in a play for Another Part of the Forest. Her achievements stretched across film, television, and theater, making her one of the most respected actresses of her time. In 2003, she was inducted into the American Theater Hall of Fame, a tribute to everything she had given to the industry. Patricia Neal passed away on August 8, 2010, at her home in Edgartown, Massachusetts. She was 84 years old and had been battling lung cancer. The night before, she told her family, "I've had a lovely time." It was a quiet and graceful farewell from a woman who had lived through some of the highest triumphs and deepest tragedies. Her career lasted over 6 decades. She won an Academy Award in 1963 for HUD and a Tony Award in 1947 for Another Part of the Forest. Hollywood admired her talent, but what truly set her apart was her strength. Life tested her in ways few could imagine. In 1960, her 1-year-old son, Theo, suffered a brain injury after a taxi hit his stroller in New York City. Just 2 years later, her 7-year-old daughter, Olivia, died from measles encephalitis. Then, in 1965, while pregnant with her 5th child, Patricia suffered 3 massive strokes. Doctors believed she would never walk or speak again. Some doubted she would even survive. But she did, and she fought her way back. She relearned how to talk and move. She returned to acting. In 1968, she starred in The Subject Was Roses, earning an Oscar nomination. Hollywood saw her comeback as a miracle. But for Patricia, survival wasn't enough. She wanted to help others. She became an advocate for stroke rehabilitation and helped establish the Patricia Neal Rehabilitation Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. The facility still operates today, helping people recover from strokes and brain injuries, just as she once had. Her story reached even more people through her autobiography, As I Am, published in 1988. She wrote honestly about her struggles, from personal loss to the challenges of being a woman in Hollywood. It wasn't just a book about fame, it was a book about survival.